Hello everybody, this video will showcase an extensive list of flash combos in League of Legends. First of all, thank you for clicking on the video. I put a lot of hours into creating this one, so any support, likes, comments or new subscribers are very much appreciated. If you want to jump straight into the content and look for a specific champion, there are timestamps in the video description to help you out. Just for a moment, I'd like to talk about the criteria I used for making this video. The first thing to say is that this list is extensive, but it's not comprehensive. There are no doubt flash combos that will not appear on the list, either because they didn't meet my loosely defined criteria, or because I just think they're silly. For example, yes, technically you can flash on Karthus to proc sudden impact and then ult for some bonus damage. That won't appear on the list. My loosely defined criteria is essentially this. If you have to cast the ability after you flash, it won't appear on the list. For example, you can't buffer Sona ult and then flash to extend the range. You have to ult after you flash, so it doesn't appear on the list. If I did include flash Sona ult, then should I also include flash Malphite ult? What about flash Nocturne ult? At some point it just becomes silly, so I tried to avoid these sorts of things. Basically every combo in this list starts with the ability and then flash, or they're cast roughly simultaneously. Again, I'm sure that a couple that shouldn't be on the list have slipped through the net. Consider them a bonus from me to you. The list is in alphabetical order. As I say, there are timestamps in the video description. Thank you for watching the video, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Enjoy! With Aatrox, you can flash at any point while casting your Q to change the damage in lockup zones. Great for catching out enemies. You can also begin to cast your W and then flash to extend the range. If you time it right, the hitbox will go much further than the animation suggests, as you can see in this clip here. With Ahri, you can cast your Q then very quickly flash to close the gap in an enemy, leaving them no time to react. You can also flash to change the direction of the orb as it comes back to you, allowing you to hit enemies that think they're safe. You can also start casting Charm and then flash to close the gap on an enemy, preventing them from dodging. This is important in lane, as you can use this Charm flash over minions to catch people out. Lastly, if your ultimate's coming up short, you can flash to extend its range slightly, dealing damage to enemies further away. With Akali, you can begin casting your Q and then flash to extend the range. Additionally, flash is one of the only ways to stop your E-dash once you've committed to following up. This is best used when you've accidentally decided to dive 1v5 into the enemy team. You can also use flash to extend the damage zones of both parts of Akali's ultimates, as you can see in this clip. This could be great for cleaning up a teamfight or killing an enemy that thinks they're safe. With Akshan, you can use flash to extend the range of your Q, allowing you to hit enemies who think they're at a safe distance. You can also flash as the boomerang is returning to change the damage path and hit enemies who were originally safe. Lastly, you can use flash with Akshan's ultimate in a couple of ways. You can channel the ultimate and then flash to get a clear shot at your target, or you can fake like you want to hit one person and then flash to put someone else in the firing line. A super useful combo in Alistar is to start casting your Q and then flash to change the impact zone. This combo can win a teamfight on its own, and you can follow up by using Headbutt to isolate a priority target. With Amumu, you can begin casting your Q and then flash very quickly to extend the range. This is useful for giving enemies less time to react to your bandage toss. You can also begin casting your ultimate and then flash to change the area affected. Again, this lessens the chance that the enemy can flash or dash out of your ultimate. With Annie, you can begin casting your W and then flash to change the damage zone. If you have your passive active, you can use this to stun a group of enemies, giving them no time to react. Also, if you cast her ultimate out of range, Annie will begin to walk in that direction until she's able to cast Tibbers. If you suddenly flash into range, Annie will drop Tibbers instantly, giving the enemy no time to react. Aurelion Sol's Q will continue to travel until he's no longer inside it. So, you can use flash to stay in range and extend the travel distance of the projectile. You can use this to catch an enemy off guard who thinks it will finish before reaching them. Additionally, you can also begin to cast Aurelion Sol's ultimate and then flash to extend its range. Not much to say for Bard. You can begin to cast Q and then very quickly flash to reach enemies that were originally out of range. For Bel'Veth, you can flash while in your Q to redirect the damage. You can also use flash with your W. Hitting an enemy with your W refreshes Q stacks in the direction that the enemy is from Bel'Veth when the ability lands. This means that you can cast your W and then flash to change which Q direction you reset. Look how I cast W here with no Q stacks and then flash into the centre of 4 enemies, resetting all directions at once. For Brand, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. You could also use this to get closer to an enemy, making it harder for them to avoid a stun. For Braum, you can flash after casting your Q to extend the range. Additionally, you could flash after casting your Q to close the gap on an enemy, making it harder to dodge. For Camille, you can flash while casting your W to quickly change the area affected. Great for catching enemies off guard. Also, if you're coming up short on your E, or if an enemy's dodged it, you can flash to change where you land. The damage and stun will still happen at the new location. This can be really useful for catching up to enemies that think they've escaped. For Cassiopeia, you can begin to cast your W and then flash to extend the range. The W grounds enemies, so this can be useful for setting up ganks in lane. More importantly, you can begin to cast your ultimate and then flash to extend the range, or change where the damage and stun go off. This is a hugely important combo to learn, as it can single-handedly change a teamfight. Not much to say for Cho'Gath. You can cast your W and flash at the same time to quickly silence enemies at range. Nothing hugely important for Corki. Your Q moves quite slowly towards a target area. By casting Q and then quickly flashing in that direction, you can make it land quicker. I don't see this coming up too often, but that's what we've got. For Darius, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to catch enemies off guard. I find this is great in lane for finishing off kills or surprising an enemy with a 5th stack of a passive. Lastly, you can flash while ulting as Darius and the damage will still go off. You might do this to quickly escape a fight or to get closer to your next victim. For Diana, there are a couple of useful interactions you should remember. Firstly, you can cast Q and then flash quickly to extend the range and hit a target that thinks they're safe. You can also cast Q and then flash into the enemy to make it almost impossible to dodge, as you can see in this clip here. With her ultimate, you can begin to cast the ability and then flash into a group of enemies to give them no time to react to the pull. You can also flash after the pull to change the damage zone of the ultimate. Both of these can be useful in different circumstances. For Draven, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to extend the range, allowing you to hit enemies who were originally too far away. You can also begin to cast your E and then flash into the enemy to make sure the ability lands. With his ultimate, the blades will always return to Draven, so you can flash to quickly change their travel path and catch an enemy off guard. For Echo, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. You can also flash into the enemy to ensure the ability lands, as can be seen in this clip. With Echo's E, you can cast the ability out of range of an enemy, target them for an auto attack, and then quickly flash into range to close the gap and deal damage almost instantly. For Elise, you're able to cast your human form E and flash at roughly the same time to get a quick stun off or extend the range. Normally you do this to quickly close the gap on an enemy and guarantee the stun. Additionally, you can also begin to cast your human form W and flash to quickly drop the exploding spider on the enemy's lap. You can even cast both the W and E while flashing to land both at the same time, as you can see in this clip. For Ezreal, you can cast Q and flash to extend the range or close the gap on an enemy. The same applies to his W, as can be seen in this clip. If you're coming up short with Ezreal's E, you can flash to get more distance, and the damage range from his E will extend as well. Lastly, you can flash while casting Ezreal's ultimate to play mind games with the enemy. Look how I'm aiming at my own base here, but the ultimate hits the target dummy behind me. This one actually breaks my own rules and shouldn't be included in the video. You can cast your ultimate as Fiddlesticks and then flash to get in range. With Fizz, you can flash while coming off your E to extend the damage range. You can use this to cover a surprisingly large distance. You can also begin to cast Fizz's ultimate and then flash to either extend the range or to throw it around enemies. There's not much to say for Galio. You can begin to cast his Q and then flash to extend the range. Additionally, the closer you flash to the enemy, the faster the projectiles will land and deal damage, as can be seen here. For Gragas, you can flash while at the end of his E to extend the range or to change the impact zone. This is super useful for ganking or finding a pick in the late game. Graves has a few interactions. Firstly, you can cast Q and then flash to change the damage path and alter how the shell will bounce off walls, as you can see here. Secondly, Graves' W moves quite slowly at range. By casting the ability and then quickly flashing towards the target, the smokescreen will land quicker. Lastly, the first impact of Graves' ultimate deals the most damage. You can begin to cast the ability, then flash to change the direction the shell will travel. This potentially means you can hit a priority target with more damage. With Gwen, you can begin to cast your Q and then at any point flash into range of an enemy. This can be good for finishing off kills when the enemy thinks they're safe. Secondly, you can begin to cast Gwen's R and then flash to extend the range, allowing you to hit an otherwise safe target, or close the gap on an enemy, giving them less time to react. There are a couple of useful interactions for Hecarim. Firstly, while using your E, you can quickly flash behind the target and auto-attack them to push them away from safety. This is excellent in early ganks. Secondly, you can flash while using your ultimate as Hecarim. The damage zone won't change, however you are able to change the fear zone, as you can see in the previous clip. Even if you're coming up short with your ultimate, you're still able to flash to extend the fear range slightly to catch an enemy. For Heimerdinger, you can begin to cast his W and then flash to extend the range. You can also begin to cast the ability and then flash into the enemy to give them less time to dodge. Heimer's E moves quite slowly, so by beginning to cast the ability and then flashing into the enemy, you can make it more likely that you'll land the stun. These principles can also be applied to his empowered W and E, where the effects are more devastating. On Alawi, you can begin to cast her E and then flash to either extend the range or find a clearer path to hit a priority target. Additionally, you can begin to cast your ultimate and then flash to change the area of impact. This can catch a team off guard and can win a team fight on its own. On Irelia, you can flash after casting your ultimate to extend the range. This can be a good way of securing a kill in lane. Additionally, you can begin to cast your ult and then flash into the enemy to give them no time to react. On Jarvan, you can start casting your Q and then flash to either extend the range or give the enemy no time to react. More importantly, you can flash while in your EQ combo to knock up enemies who weren't originally in danger. On Jax, you can cast the second part of your counter-strike and flash simultaneously to stun enemies while giving them absolutely no time to react. On Jace, you can cast your ranged Q and then flash quickly to extend the range, or to give the enemy no time to react. If you're super quick, you can do this combo and throw in an E to land an accelerated shock blast on the enemy at short range. On Kai'Sa, you can cast your W then flash to extend the range, although given how long the max range is, that's unlikely to be relevant. What might be more relevant is that you can cast your W then flash into the enemy to land the W, giving them no time to react. You can also flash to find a clearer path towards a priority target. On Kalista, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. You can also flash into the enemy, giving them no time to dodge, although now you're a squishy AD carry in melee range, so perhaps that isn't the best option. On Karma, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. You could also flash into the enemy, giving them no time to dodge. This works for both her basic and mantra Q, as you can see in the clip. On Kassadin, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to hit enemies who were originally out of range. Secondly, you can flash after casting your Rift Walk to extend the range and change the damage zone, as you can see in this clip. On Kayle, you can flash at any point during your ultimate to change the damage zone. You can use this to catch enemies off guard and burst down enemies that have clumped up together, with the trade-off that you'll now be stuck in melee range, so you'll need to be careful with this one. On Kennen, you can flash during your E to instantly apply a stack of your passive to an enemy. This can be useful for setting up ganks when you already have a stack or two on an enemy laner. Secondly, you can cast your ultimate and then flash simultaneously to instantly get in range of a target. Again, this works best if the enemy already has a stack or two of your passive on them. On Kha'Zix, you can begin to cast your W then flash to either extend the range or to get in close to an enemy and ensure they can't dodge. Secondly, it's just important to note that you can flash during your ultimate and it won't break the stealth. On Kled, you can cast your Q and then flash to either extend the range or to get in close to an enemy and ensure they can't dodge. You can also use your Q and then flash to find a clear path to a priority target. Secondly, if you're coming up short on your E charge, then you can flash to extend the range.
My land begins where I walk. It ends where the sun don't shine. Yes, girl.
On LeBlanc, you can cast your E and then flash to either extend the range or to close the gap on an enemy, giving them no time to react. This works for both her basic and ultimate E. You can also use your flash after casting E to find a clear path to a priority target. On Lee Sin, you can begin casting your E and then flash to change the area affected, as can be seen in this clip. Secondly, you can begin casting your ultimate as Lee Sin and then flash to change the direction you kick the target. This is a great way to isolate an important target or kick a tank into squishier members of the team. On Lilia, you can begin casting your Q and then flash into range of an enemy. This will usually catch people off guard and gives them little time to react. Additionally, Lilia's E moves slowly. By casting it and then flashing towards an enemy, you can make it much easier to land. On Lissandra, you can cast your W and then flash simultaneously to instantly appear next to your enemy and root them. This is great for setting up a gank or a late game pick. On Lulu, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or change the direction it comes from. Depending on the position of picks, this can be a useful way of hitting multiple enemies. On Lux, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. If you cast the ability then flash into melee range of an enemy, you can make it near impossible to dodge. This is extremely useful for setting up ganks or getting important picks and starting teamfights. On Malphite, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to change the area of effect. This can be extremely useful for crippling heavy auto-attack users in teamfights. On Maokai, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. If you're already in close to the enemy, you can cast Q and then flash to the other side of them to knock them back towards your team. On Mordekaiser, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range and change the area of effect. This is great for finishing off kills when an enemy is isolated. Secondly, you can cast your ultimate and then flash, and that will change the position of the arena during the ultimate. This is pretty niche, but it can trap people in some awkward spots around towers. On Nautilus, you can begin to cast your E and then quickly flash towards an enemy to ensure you land the ability. On Nico, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to extend the range. You can also flash directly into an enemy to give them no time to dodge. Secondly, you can begin casting your ultimate as Nico and then flash just before the damage goes off to surprise the enemy, giving them no time to react. On Olaf, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash directly into an enemy to ensure it lands. This is useful for getting a pick on an isolated enemy. Additionally, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to very slightly extend the range, as you can see in this clip. It doesn't extend the range an awful lot, but it might be what you need to secure a kill. If you're feeling brave on Orianna, there are a couple of flash combos available. Firstly, you can cast W and flash simultaneously to land the damage and slow an enemy, giving them no time to react. Secondly, you can begin to cast Shockwave while the ball is attached to yourself and then flash into enemies to catch them off guard. On Pantheon, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range. This trick applies to both his quick Q attack and his charged Q attack, as you can see in this clip. Secondly, you can flash at any point during Pantheon's E to quickly get in range of an enemy that would otherwise be safe. On Poppy, you can flash while casting your Q to extend the range and quickly get in close to an enemy. Additionally, you can flash then quickly use your E to catch an enemy off guard and land a pivotal stun. Technically this one breaks my rules, but it's important that you can do this on Poppy to play her well, so I've included it. On Pyke, you can begin casting your Q and then flash to extend the range and hook an otherwise safe enemy. You can also do this with the shorter uncharged Q. After casting Pyke's E, you can flash to extend the stun and damage zone, which is great for setting up kills for your team. On Qiyana, you can begin casting your Q and then flash to extend the range, or to close the gap on an enemy, preventing them from dodging. Additionally, you can begin to cast your ultimate as Qiyana and then flash so as to knock enemies into terrain, empowering your ultimate. On Quinn, you can use your flash to animation cancel your vault ability, allowing you to get in more DPS and quickly burst down enemies. On Rammus, you can flash while in your Powerball to avoid skill shots and quickly get in range of enemies. Flashing into enemies with Powerball leaves them practically no time to react, making it easier for you to lock them down. On Rek'Sai, you can target an enemy for a basic attack while burrowed and out of range, and then flash into range. This will immediately cause you to unburrow, knocking up the enemy and giving them no time to react. On Rel, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or close the gap on an enemy, giving them no time to dodge. Secondly, you can cast Rel's E and flash simultaneously to instantly appear next to an enemy and stun them, again giving them little or no time to react. Lastly, you can begin to cast Rel's ultimate and then flash into enemies to land the ability. This can be a great way of getting picks and starting team fights in the late game, and again it gives the enemies no chance to escape. On Renata, you can begin to cast your ultimate and then flash just before it goes off to quickly close the gap on enemies. This can win a team fight on its own. On Rengar, you can cast W and then flash at the same time to instantly apply the damage to an enemy at range. Secondly, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to either extend the range or close the gap on an enemy, giving them no time to dodge. Lastly, while in your ultimate, you can target an enemy who is out of range for a basic attack and then flash into range, causing you to instantly leap at the target from stealth. On Riven, you can flash just before casting your third Q to quickly close the gap on an enemy and ensure you land the knock-up. Additionally, you can cast W and then flash at the same time to appear on top of an enemy, guaranteeing the stun. I'd recommend you look up a player like Viper to find out more about Riven flash combos, as she has so many. On Rumble, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to extend the range, or close the gap on an enemy to ensure you land the ability. On Samira, you can begin casting your Q and then flash to extend the range. You can also do this with her melee Q, where you can change the damage zone after casting the ability. Secondly, you can use flash while in Samira's E to deal damage to enemies who would otherwise be safe. On Sejuani, you can use Flash to extend the range of your Q, allowing you to hit enemies who would otherwise be safe. If you position the Flash correctly, you can use this to knock enemies back in a desired direction. You can also begin to cast Sejuani's W and then Flash to extend the range. Lastly, you can begin to cast Sedge's ultimate and then flash into an enemy if you want to guarantee it lands. On Senna, you can begin to cast your W and then flash to either extend the range or close the gap on an enemy, making it harder to dodge. On Seraphine, you can begin casting your E and then flash to extend the range, or get close to an enemy, making it harder to dodge. You can begin casting your ultimate and then flash just before it goes off to ensure you give the enemy no time to react. On Set, you can begin winding up your W and then flash to change the area of effect. This is super useful for sniping kills in lane or blowing up squishies in a teamfight. On Shen, you can flash while in your taunt dash to either extend the range or change the target location. In both instances, this allows you to taunt enemies who would otherwise be safe. This is incredibly useful for getting picks throughout the game. On Shyvana, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to either extend the range or close the gap on an enemy and ensure the ability lands. This works in both her human form and dragon form, although it's probably much more useful in a dragon form. On Sion, you can begin to cast your E and then quickly flash to either extend the range or get close to an enemy to ensure the ability lands. Secondly, you can activate the first part of Sion's W and then flash and activate the explosion simultaneously to instantly hit nearby enemies, giving them no time to dodge. On Sivir, you can cast Q and then flash to extend the range. Additionally, as the boomerang is returning to you, you can use flash to change its flight path, potentially allowing you to hit priority targets. On Swain, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or get in closer to an enemy to ensure it lands. This same principle applies to his E, again, where you can flash to extend the range, or get in closer to ensure it lands. Lastly, while in his ultimate form, you can flash just after reactivating the ability to get in range of enemies and instantly hit them with the explosion. On Syndra, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to extend the range, or to push the enemy in a desired direction. If you have a dark sphere right behind the enemy, you can push them in that desired direction and stun them. On Talia, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or get in close to an enemy to stop them dodging. This works for both her little Q and her big Q. Secondly, you can begin to cast your E and then flash to extend the range. On Talon, you can cast his W and then flash to extend the range, or to get in close to an enemy, preventing them from dodging. Secondly, while in your ultimate, you can flash to ensure that an enemy is hit by the returning blades. On Taric, you can begin casting your E and then flash into range of an opponent to surprise them with a quick stun. Additionally, you can begin to channel your ultimate and then flash to quickly get in range of an ally, potentially turning the tide of a skirmish. On Tristana, you can begin casting your ultimate and then flash to knock back the enemy in a desired direction. On Tryndamere, you can flash to extend the damage range of your E, allowing you to hit enemies that would otherwise be safe. On TF, you can begin to cast your Q and then flash to give the enemy no time to dodge. Additionally, once you've selected a card with your W, you can target an enemy who is out of range for a basic attack, and then flash into range to instantly throw the card. On Urgot, after the initial channel of your E, you can flash, which will allow you to hit enemies who are otherwise safe. This is very good in lane for setting up ganks or solo kills. On Varus, you can flash while channeling your Q in order to hit enemies who would otherwise be out of range. Additionally, you can begin to cast your ultimate and then flash to either extend the range, or to get in close to an enemy and ensure the ability lands. On Vayne, you can begin casting Condemn and then flash to knock back the enemy in a desired direction. Most of the time you're going to use this to surprise an enemy with a quick stun. On Veigar, you can begin casting Q and then flash to extend the range, or to close the gap on an enemy and ensure the ability lands. By casting your ultimate first and then Q flashing, you can ensure that the Q lands first, meaning the ultimate can deal more damage. On Vel'Koz, you can cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or get closer to an enemy to prevent them from dodging. The same principle can be applied when casting his W. On Vex, you can begin casting your Q and then flash to extend the range, or get close to an enemy preventing them from dodging. You can also cast her W and flash simultaneously to get close to enemies and deal damage instantly. This is very strong when you pair it with her passive. Lastly, you can cast your ultimate and then flash to get in close to enemies, making it harder for them to react. On Vi, you can use flash while dashing with your Q to extend the range and catch enemies who were originally safe. If you angle the Q and flash correctly, you can push enemies in a desired direction. You can also begin winding up your E auto attack and then flash to redirect the damage zone. Lastly, you can flash while dashing with your ultimate to hit other enemies on your way to your target. On Viego, you can begin casting Q and then flash to extend the range. Additionally, while channeling your stun, you can release the ability and then flash at the same time to extend the range or quickly get in close to an enemy, making it nearly impossible for them to dodge the ability. On Vladimir, you can begin channeling your E and then flash while releasing the ability to extend the range or get in close to an enemy, dealing damage almost instantly. On Warwick, you can activate the first part of your E and then at any point before it goes off automatically, you can reactivate the ability and flash simultaneously into an enemy to instantly fear them. On Xayah, you can begin casting Q and then flash to extend the range, or get in close to an enemy and ensure the ability lands. Secondly, you can flash while casting your E to reposition and ensure that your feathers hit priority targets as they return. Lastly, you can flash while in your ultimate to reposition and ensure that enemies are struck by the feathers that you throw out. On Xerath, you can channel your Q and then flash to get in range of an enemy who is otherwise safe. Additionally, you can begin to cast your E and then flash towards an enemy to ensure it lands, but stuns for less time, or flash away from an enemy to make it harder to land but stun for more time. On Xin Zhao, you can begin to cast your W and then flash to get in range of an enemy. This is great when you're trying to chase down a kill. Additionally, you can begin to cast your ultimate and then flash into enemies to quickly knock them back and deal damage. On Yasuo, you can begin casting Q and then flash to extend the range or get close to an enemy, making it harder for them to dodge. This works for his basic Q and his tornado. Additionally, with your tornado ready, you can EQ and then flash at an enemy to instantly knock them up, allowing you to use your ultimate. On Yone, you can begin casting Q and then flash to extend the range or get in close to an enemy, making it hard to dodge. This works for his basic Q and his tornado. Additionally, you can begin to cast his W then flash to change the area of effect. On Zed, you can cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or get in close to an enemy making it harder to dodge. You can also cast your E and then flash simultaneously to instantly apply the damage to an enemy at range. On Zeri, you can cast your Q and then flash to extend the range, or get in close to an enemy making it harder to dodge. Additionally, you can begin to cast your ultimate and then flash into enemies to quickly hit them with the shockwave. On Zoe, you can flash with your Q in order to boost its damage and extend its range. Additionally, flashing will instantly proc Zoe's W ability.